Welcome back, boxing fans. This is a video I've been planning for a week, two, but obviously we had some more news break yesterday or the day before about a possible 5 via 5 versus Golden Boy and Top Rank, which I think Punch Drunk was talking about yesterday or the day before after talking to Teofimo Lopez. And this is not something we should take for granted because we know obviously the Saudis are paying to have a 5-on-5 tournament in the UK and obviously in Saudi Arabia. They're going to do a double decker. So one's going to be in Saudi Arabia on the bottom of the Bivol Better BF card, and then they're going to have one later on this summer in London. And that's great news because it's really interesting and intriguing to do this kind of matchup between promoters. We've had far too much dick riding promoters type of stuff over the last few years, ever really since Floyd Mayweather crossed over to Showtime. And then it became Showtime is pro-black and HBO is racist. And this was the big narrative that really followed along boxing since that era, and obviously is just carried over to pro-PBC, pro-black PBC, and anti-racist, everybody else. Yet the PBC's cards are predominantly Latino fighters. What does that tell you about this pro-black stance? But, common sense is not that common. That's what we find in boxing. So, it's nice that we're getting this kind of stuff to put all that kind of BS behind us. I mean, if you're a boxing fan, the reality is you shouldn't be dick riding a promoter. Promoters have their own best interest at hand, not yours. And if you're too stupid to understand that, well, I'm sorry for you because, you just don't fit in the modern world. The reality of the situation is, as a fan of a sport, you want to see the best. That's what you want to pay for. You don't want to be dicked around and given this narrative that you're getting the best, even though you know you're not. And if you're a casual fan, okay, I can understand you buying into this kind of stuff. But for us, hardcore fans, we can see through this shit. And the people that pretend to be hardcore fans but pay tribute to it, I don't understand those dudes because they're not helping boxing. But, it is what it is. So today I'm going to be talking about primarily the PBC Top Rank matchup, which is obviously something that I was hoping we could see after this Matchroom Queensberry 5-on-5 was announced most recently. And I thought if we do this in the States, this would be the perfect promoter versus promoter. We know there's been a lot of hostility between PBC and Top Rank over the years, going back to Floyd Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao, and most recently Terrence Crawford and Errol Spence, right? And so if we could do something to get these two promotional companies to work together to put on a bunch of fights on the same card, that would be beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And there's no reason it shouldn't happen because I think Turki Ali Sheikh sees the same thing you and I see, and he believes exactly the same as you do, that, yeah, why the fuck not? Let's make these fights. You dudes can work together. It's going to benefit everybody. You ain't losing out on anything. If anything, you're capitalizing on an opportunity. But let's get to this and check it out. So PBC versus Top Rank. This is potentially fantastic news, something that boxing fans should be excited about. I mean, obviously, Bob Arum is getting long in the tooth, and he may not be around that much longer. He's already in his mid-90s. I mean, people do not live forever. So it'd be great to see Bob Arum involved in a fight card of this magnitude, right, to end his legacy in the sport of boxing. And for Al Haymon, we never see Al Haymon. He doesn't feel the need to actually put himself out there to boxing fans, yet for some reason people still want to protect him and defend him, even though he doesn't talk, and we can only judge him based on what he does, right? Whereas every other promoter is out there doing what promoters do, promoting. And I ain't hating on him. I'm just saying, for Al Haymon, this would be great too, because people talk about him and the PBC not wanting to work with outside promotional companies. Well, this would squash that dead. People couldn't say that anymore because literally we would be seeing that. I mean, that's one of the positive things we see with this current current Bud Crawford fight card against Madrimov, because it's stacked full of PBC fighters. And that's great. Nobody's hating on the PBC. The only thing is people want to see these fighters face the best fighters available, like every promotional company. That's it. That's all. But let's move through this and check it out. So I just figured out a few potential fights that could be on this card. And this was one. Obviously, Stephen Fulton, the unified 122-pound champion, 21-1, 8 KOs, 1 loss, 2 pound for pound, top 3 fighter, the Monster Inui, against Bruce Carrington, Shoo Carrington, who's looked great, and is looking for a big opportunity. And maybe Stephen Fulton wouldn't be interested in finding a guy that you could say is basically a prospect, even though I do feel Carrington is past that prospect stage and he's at a point where he is a contender. And as far as Fulton is concerned, moving to 126 is a brand new weight class for him as well, right? So taking on a guy like this would be a great potential opponent, especially if it's being funded by the Saudis. This would be a great fight. 2 very talented 126-pound fighters. Maybe the winner of this could potentially be an Inui opponent when Inui chooses to move to 126 pounds to become a 5-weight world champion. And for Carrington, this would be the opportunity to showcase himself. If he can do what Inui did or do better than Inui, that would be a huge statement. And for Fulton, if he could bounce back, redeem himself, and sort of then take over the 126-pound division, he could put himself back in line for a potential rematch and try to, redeem himself after that embarrassing loss to Inui. And I think it's a great matchup. 2 slick, long fighters. Obviously, Carrington is the bigger puncher and the more aggressive fighter. But I think stylistically, it's a really good matchup. I'd love to see this on the card. At this point, it's hard to favor Carrington because he doesn't have as much experience, especially at the top end like Fulton does. Fulton, he's been inactive since his Inui loss. So, it would be great to get him back in the ring now or then, right, at some time. Because obviously there's a lot of potential fights at 126 pounds for him. And just because you take 1 loss to Inui doesn't mean you should disappear and fall off the radar. And I'm sure he's eager to get back in the ring. So, obviously there's other potential opponents they could throw Fulton in with, other fighters at 126 pounds. If I think off the top of my head, obviously Espinoza and Robsy Ramirez are 2 fighters, and they're going to be rematching for that WBO title. Both of them are obviously ESPN top-ranked fighters. Maybe Fulton could jump in there. But you would think Fulton needs to at least get a comeback fight before jumping into another world title fight. That's why I thought this would be a really good fight, and a fight that boxing fans in the States would be really jacked about as well. Then we get this fight. Great fight. 2 guys really that are moving up the 154-pound rankings, putting themselves potentially back into world title contention. Obviously, for Erickson Lubin, he's been there before, but he's failed on his other opportunities. So, obviously, he's trying to put himself back into a third, 3 times lucky, as they like to say. And for Xander Zayas, 18-0, 12 knockout, Puerto Rican, top rank contender. He's continuously moved his career forward, and now he needs a big fight to prove that he's at that level. Erickson Lubin is the perfect opponent, right? The winner of this would be right in position for a world title fight. I think Lubin is already in position for potentially the IBF world title fight, if I'm not mistaken, or the WBC. He's there ranked for one of those rankings. And obviously the winner of this would be great. And this would be a huge fight. It would get tons of attention. Puerto Rico has been looking for another great fighter. Obviously, Erickson Lubin wants big fights, wants to put himself back into world title contention. This would be a very intriguing matchup. If Xander Zayas could beat Lubin, that's a huge statement and definitely puts him right at the top of the 154-pound rankings. And if for Lubin, you beat this kid, which many people would feel you should because of your experience, then you just put yourself back into a world title fight, right? And possibly 3 times lucky. But this would be an interesting fight. Obviously, the first card was 2 Black Americans. Here you have another Black American and a Puerto Rican. A card of this nature, you're trying to attract every demographic of American boxing fan. so that they will pay attention to this card. So you need to have some Latin flavor, and obviously we're probably going to have some Mexicans on this card as well. And by doing that, you're going to be much more uh, the type of card that everyone can relate to and everyone can get excited to. We know a lot of people only support boxers based on ethnicity and race. So in knowing that, you obviously have to give the fans what they want, even though I feel that's a stupid way to support boxing, but to each their own, I guess. Then we get this fight, which I think would be dynamite. Dynamite. We know Mario Barros is right in position to get a vacant WBC title, 28-2, 18 knockouts, one time stopped against Giovanni Santillan, 32-0, 17 KOs. It would be a great fight. Both of these guys are right there as potential world champions. Both of them may be elevated by their sanctioning body, one by the WBC, one by the WBO. You get these guys matched up on this card, and then the winner potentially could fight Boots Ennis for unification. You also have potentially the other fighter at welterweight. I'm trying to think, who would the other belt be? IBF is Boots. WBC is Barrios. Santillan is WBO. Who's WBA? For some reason, that escapes me. But if you know, leave in the comment section below. But I think this is a great fight, stylistically very interesting. Mario Barros is the taller, longer fighter. Santillan is just the much more aggressive fighter, shorter, better inside fighter. So it's going to really be a battle of two styles, but it should be a great fight. And as I said, you're trying to make fights that relate to a broader American demographic. So here you have Mario Barros, who's Mexican American and Aboriginal mix, I think, and then Santillan, who obviously I think is Mexican American. So you're just piling this card up with great fights and covering the whole racial demographic, so that boxing fans will all be interested in this card for one reason or another. But when it comes down to it, they should just be excited because these are great matchups, very competitive, truly 50-50 fights, right? And we haven't even talked about any superstar names yet, right? All 6 of the guys I mentioned, they are top fighters in their weight classes, but none of them are superstars. And for a matchup like this, it's probably unlikely that you're going to get superstars. You're probably going to get more of this kind of setup. Then we get to number 4, which is a great fight. Carlos Adames, 23-1, a guy who should be elevated to the WBC champion. And obviously represents the PBC. And then Janibek, who is 15-0, 10 KOs, and is the united WBO and I think IBF world champion. And obviously Erislandy Lara is the WBA champion right now. So potentially the winner of this could take on that winner for undisputed in the middleweight division. It definitely brings a lot more intrigue to the middleweight division, which has kind of been dead over the last few years. Carlos Adames is hungry. Janibek is hungry. You put this fight out there, it's a great fight. I mean, another 50-50 fight, another fight that's really intriguing and a great matchup. And any real boxing fan would look at this and think, fuck, man, this is dynamite. This card is dynamite. So far, I've seen 4 fights, and I don't know who's going to win any of those fights, right? I could speculate on who I think is going to win, but truly they are all 50-50 fights. So you have to just say, may the best man win. And then we get to the final fight, which obviously it's nice to have a superstar matchup to sell this fight. You're going to do this on pay-per-view. You need a headline fight, a fight that's going to galvanize the boxing public. These 2 guys have been going back and forth like crazy. One's a WBA champion, one's a WBC champion. I mean, this shit's fire. With the stuff that's just popped out recently from Floyd Mayweather, talking about this is the fight that needs to happen. I think Floyd is really just telling boxing fans what we've been asking for. This is what boxing fans have been asking for. Tank Davis against Shakur Stevenson, 2 pound-for-pound quality fighters. The winner of this becomes pound-for-pound top 5, right? Joins, obviously, Inouye, Bud Crawford, the winner of Better Biev and Bivol, Usyk, and Canelo Alvarez. And depending on what happens with Canelo and how he looks, this guy might pass Canelo, who would drop to sixth, right? Which tells you boxing is great. Boxing is going so well right now. There's so many great fighters. This fight would be unbelievable. Great stylistic matchup. I mean, this fight would really sell this pay-per-view. You look at the other five fights on the card, great. And, all of them almost could be considered unification fights. The middleweight fight, 3-belt unification. What was the other fight? The welterweight fight, 2-belt unification. Obviously, the 126-pound fight is just two top contenders putting themselves in position to get a world title fight. And what I'm missing something. I can't remember what I'm missing, but I'm missing something. And then this fight, another unification fight. This card would just blow the fucking doors off. I think if you're an American boxing channel, an American boxing fan, and you don't think this is one of the best cards ever, you're delusional. And fine, the guys under the card may not be superstar names, but it's not about superstar names. It's about world champion, top level dudes, right? Fighting other top level dudes in truly 50-50 fights, and a clash of the PBC versus Top Rank, right? Dynamite. So what do you think about this card? Who would you put on it if you had a choice? If you could add other people to it, who do you think you would want on it? And as far as this matchup, who's going to win, the PBC or Top Rank? We know when Top Rank PBC matches up, generally the PBC ends up coming on the wrong side of the tracks, right? Generally, they end up losing. In this case, when we think about this fight card, let's break it down. So you have PBC versus Top Rank. I mean, I favor Shushu Carrington because I think he's got a lot of the same skill set that Fulton has, but I think he's really budding and his power is really, really coming into form. And I think he's really a Tommy Hearns-esque type of fighter who does have power. And I do think that in this fight, we're going to see the best version of Shushu, and Shushu would beat Fulton. So I would say 1-0 Top Rank. But I ain't taking anything away from Fulton because obviously he's the much more experienced fighter, has been in with way better opposition. So I would not be surprised at all if he beat the young up-and-comer, right? I wouldn't be surprised. But when you listen to Shushu Carrington talk, the dude's very mature, very grounded, very down to earth, right? He's not a dude that's letting early fame and money and distractions get to him. Not like some of the people he rolls with, like Big Baby Anderson, right? He ain't letting those kind of things sidetrack his career. He's focused. And I think in 2024, he's really going to make a statement. And I think by 2025, he's going to be a world champion. And he just might be the fighter that Nui faces when he moves to this division. So I'm hoping he develops and becomes a unified superstar fighter at 126. So that fight's going to be that much bigger and that much more exciting. So I got it 1-0 Top Rank. But let me know what you think in the comment section below. Number 2, Xander Zayas versus Erickson Lubin. This is a hard one to pick because I favor Lubin to win, the much more experienced fighter. I think he's the more naturally harder puncher. I don't think he's technically as good as Zayas, but Zayas has looked really inconsistent at times. And that may be just because he loses focus because he's in with opponents that just aren't that dangerous. And when you throw him in with a guy like Lubin, now all of a sudden, he's going to have to be focused. He's going to be sharper. So I could definitely see him really making a statement, really proving himself against Lubin, who has been beaten by less technically skilled fighters like Funduro. Funduro is not technically as good as Zayas, not even close, right? But he was still very effective against Lubin. So it'll be a great fight, but I have to favor Lubin in this matchup because he's older, more experienced, and I think his power definitely carries later on in fights. And he's been in tough. So I think mentally he's just going to be far more in tuned, whereas Zayas has never been at this level. And so we don't know how he's going to cope, right? So I would favor it Lubin 1-1, PBC top rank equal. Giovanni Santillan versus Mario Barros. This is a tough fight. Mario Barros looked really good against Ugis. He's a long fighter. Obviously has a very good punch output as well. Santillan looked great against Rocha, but Rocha is a pretty one-dimensional, limited fighter who you should look good against. He's going to be giving up quite a bit of arm reach against Mario Barros. He hasn't really fought the same level of opponents that Mario Barros has fought. Sure, he's lost to those fighters, but he's fought those fighters. At this point, Santillan hasn't. So I kind of got to favor Mario Barros in this fight, 2-1 PBC. Then we get to Janibek versus Carlos Adames. I do think Janibek technically is too good for Adames, but I think Adames is aggressive, a hard puncher, and definitely is going to make this fight really exciting and could really maybe drop Janibek in this fight, really test him, and really show us what kind of heart and determination Janibek has. And if he doesn't have those things, then you could see Carlos Adames totally run over top of him. But I think Janibek technically is a much better fighter. You have an aggressive fighter coming at you. It's just going to make you look that much better because you don't need to come finding him. He's going to come bringing it to you. And I think that's really going to highlight Janibek's skill set. So I do think Janibek wins. So it's 2-2 top rank. And then it comes down to the big fight. Davis, Shakur. This is truly a tough fight to pick. I think out of these two fighters, I'm much more of a Tank Davis fan. Far more exciting fighter, dynamic, explosive. I'm much more intrigued by watching his fights than I am by watching Shakur Stevenson, who is more of a boring defense-first type of fighter. Not the kind of fighters I really roll with. But I do think him being a lefty, him being defense first, is going to really be a tricky fight for Tank. We've seen Tank against lesser opponents give up rounds, right? Kind of like Deontay Wilder and others. He doesn't have the highest punch output, so he can be outworked. He can be outworked by a good jab, movement, frustrated. That's why I always thought Lomachenko would beat him. I always felt Lomachenko would frustrate him, and eventually mentally he would be broken. And that's when Lomachenko would really sort of punish him later in the fight, because I think he would just lose it and lose his focus, which would allow Lomachenko to really sort of start hitting him clean and frustrating him even more. And I think Stevenson is now at that point where Lomachenko was. I don't think he's quite as good offensively as Lomachenko was, but obviously very good skill-wise. And I think he too can frustrate Tank, hit him consistently, stay out of range, win rounds, and make Tank Davis start to get a little anxious and potentially reach and maybe get sloppy. And in doing that, he might allow Stevenson to really showcase his ability even more. So while I favor Tank Davis because he's so dangerous, and I think, we've never seen Shakur against an opponent at that level before. So it'd be premature of me to say that he's better and he would win the fight. I do lean towards Tank Davis on my personal side as a fighter I'd want to win. And become one of those top 5 pound-for-pound fighters. It's always nice to have new guys join that list when you get a young crew of guys like, well, even though I don't know how young it would be, I'm favoring Beterbiev. So then you have Crawford, who's old, Beterbiev, who's old, right? And then Usyk, who's old. And then you have Inouye and Tank, who are, not old. So it's not really a young guys list. Everybody's almost 30 years old and higher 30s. But I have to favor Shakur. I just think he has more ways to win. Obviously, Tank Davis is very dangerous, so you cannot overlook him at all. But I favor Shakur in this fight, even though it's a very tough fight to predict, very tough. Maybe, after seeing, Tank Davis versus Martin and then Shakur's next fight, I might totally have a revelation and think completely differently because, I don't think Frank Martin's as good as Shakur, but he definitely brings some similarities to the game that we haven't seen Tank Davis with in the ring with. And those kind of things might be exploited against Tank Davis. And at that point, I might feel very comfortable that Shakur would beat him. Or we might see Tank Davis really elevate his level and show that, yeah, slick black fighters, that ain't something to worry about. Tank Davis can handle them as well as he can flat-footed Latino guys. And at that point, maybe then I'd be more leaning towards Tank Davis because of his power and explosiveness. But at this point, I have to favor Shakur. So I got it 3-2 top rank. But let me know in the comment section below how you think this would unfold and what other fights do you think would be good on this card. For now, that's all I got to say. Obviously, I would love to see that Golden Boy Bob Arum card, or even Golden Boy versus PBC. My question is, with Golden Boy, do they have enough fighters to actually put a quality 5-on-5 card together? Like, I made this card and I thought about good 50-50 matchups, a headline fight, and then really great unification type of fights underneath, and then a real showcase fight as the first fight, with Shushu Carrington. You could throw Keyshawn Davis on this card as well. Abdullah Mason easily could be on this card. There's a lot of top rank and PBC fighters I didn't talk about that could easily be on this card. Instead of Carlos Adames, you could throw Garcia, the young up-and-coming PBC middleweight who's really, really good against Janibek. And I would kind of favor Garcia to beat Janibek, even though he's young and untested at that level. I've been pretty impressed with what I watched so far of him. I definitely think he is probably one of the best young up-and-coming prospect contender fighters the PBC has. Keep an eye on him. But yeah, let me know who you think should be on this card. Thanks for watching. And as always, remember to like, subscribe, and share.